Okay, folks, so we're back and let's keep going. Okay, so Middle Ages. So we're talking about, when we've heard this term before, the Middle Ages, but once again, what are they the middle of, right? Why are they called the Middle Ages? Why is it that, well, wouldn't a different time period be considered the middle of something? Because I guess if you talk about now, the present time, and you talk about the ancient time, I guess those would be the Middle Ages, but there's a lot of time between that, encompasses these Middle Ages. So, it's kind of one of those strange things that historians have come up with, but other people who are not historians have come up with this idea of the Middle Ages. Okay, so we're gonna the focus of today's talk is going to be about this early part, right? The early Middle Ages, the 476 to 1000 mark. Why we have those specific dates? The answer to one of those, the 476, but we got to figure out why we have the whole 1000 type of thing as well too. Okay, so I'm not going to go totally nuts on drawing this out, but we will get to the main ideas. Okay, so at the beginning of the early Middle Ages, grab my thing here, we see a concept that we're thankfully getting away from because it's very inaccurate. And so the idea is this thing called the Dark Ages. Okay, so this early Middle Ages. Just make sure my camera's running really quick. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so this early Middle Ages, right, 476 to 1000. This period is often coined as the Dark Ages. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have heard of this one, but you've all heard of the Middle Ages. But the Dark Ages, and the Dark Ages give us this idea that, when something is dark, it's the absence of light, right? It's the absence of light. And the reason why this came about is because, we see with the Romans, right? Well, first with the Greeks, and then the Romans expand upon it, make it even better and bigger, is the absence of darkness, right? And darkness can be symbolized as what? Ignorance, the lack of learning. And light can be symbolized as some being knowledge, learning, academia, whatever you want to call it. The point of taking your civilization, taking your culture, and having an understanding about it, having understanding about the world. And we saw that with the Romans. I mean, they last for a long, long time. And we see a totally functioning government. We see a totally functioning military, the arts, philosophy, religion. We see all of this in a society, and it changes, and there's bad parts with it and there's great parts with it, but we see that there's something happening, that when a new crop of Romans get born, they're being taught all this, and same thing, and same thing, and same thing, generation to generation. But now the Romans are gone. Okay, the Romans are gone, and we get to the early Middle Ages. So after 476, we get to this time period called the Dark Ages, and this is a very modern term. People started using this term about 100-something years ago. That they're saying the idea is twofold. That the early Middle Ages are considered the Dark Ages. Well, number one, because there was no learning going on. That just like, where we had the Romans, now all of a sudden there's no learning going on. That the Romans did all this amazing stuff. Why do we know so much about the Romans? Well, because they wrote stuff down. We know so much about Julius Caesar and Augustus or whoever it might be, or this emperor, that emperor, or this war, or whatever it might be, because things were written down and then they were translated and they were put down and they were taught to somebody else. But in the early Middle Ages, we just don't have that. Society has lost that. Society has lost that light of learning, but only to a certain degree. Okay, so yes, the Dark Ages are, well, an outmoded term because it is impossible, folks, for humans not to be learning at all times. Okay, now what type of learning are they learning? Are these people in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, are they going to school? No, schools don't exist. Are they going to, going tutoring with their tutor, the professor? No, doesn't exist, not happening, okay? Are they picking up a book to read by the fire at the end of the night? No, not at all, doesn't exist. So we see an absence of academic learning. We see an absence of reading and writing, okay? We see an absence of the types of learning that you guys are getting, now. This idea that somebody has this information, they're giving you the information, you're writing it down, you can go home, you can study it, you can learn more about it, you can ask questions about it. That's all gone for the most part, okay? The vast majority of these people are not dealing with that, okay? They're not dealing with that. The reason being is because these people are living very, 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 very difficult lives. And we're going to be talking about that. These people are not going to school. These people are not going to university and hanging out. They're not going to join their frat parties. They're just trying to live. And so when we think about the Dark Ages, this concept, and I put it in quotations for a reason, because did it truly exist? Well, in that form, yeah. We see an absence of academic knowledge, academic learning. It just doesn't happen. It's not going on, okay? But learning is happening, a certain other type of learning. Because like I said, it is impossible for humans never be learning something. So even though you're not sitting there reading, the latest issue of Vogue, you're still learning something. So for instance, if you're a farmer and you're sitting there, and you're 17, and what is your dad doing? Your dad is showing you how to plant this crop, okay? And you're learning all of the tricks and tips that he's learned from his father and his father before him and so on. So that when you grow up and you have your own children, what are you teaching them? Are you teaching them about, how to read and write? No, you don't even know how to spell your own name. You were never taught. You don't know your letters, you sure as heck don't know Latin, okay? But you are teaching them the beneficial stuff that's gonna help them at least live a little bit, okay? You're teaching them how to live in the world. You're not teaching them academia, you're teaching them how to get the best milk from the cow. You're teaching them how to get food from this spot because it doesn't grow over here. You're teaching them how to fish, whatever. You're teaching them how to survive, okay? So we do see learning, okay? The other problem with the Dark Ages, and this correlates with that too, is that who are the only people that really know how to learn academics? And that is the church, okay? The members of the church. For the most part, for a very, very, very long time, the only people in a small village that know how to read and write are the church authorities, like the local priest, okay? And the bishops and so on. The local people don't know how to read and write. But this person does, and he might have a book or two in his collection, and he knows how to read it, and he understands, right? Probably has a Bible that's been transcribed, been copied word by word. He knows how to read. He knows how to sign his name and everything else. And what separates him is not only does he know how to read and write in your language, whatever that language may be, but he knows how to read and write in Latin, which you obviously do not know. You don't, like I said, if you don't know your own language, you're sure as heck not going to know Latin, okay? So even if you somehow got a hold of one of his books, very rare and treasured, even if you somehow got a hold of one of those books, you're not reading it, okay? It would serve you no purpose, except, I guess, to start a fire or something like that. You're not going to be sitting down and reading it. You have no idea what these Latin words mean. You see certain words over and over again, like Jesus, but that's it. You don't know what Jesus was doing, anything else like that. There's no pictures, nothing. It's basically just some Latin on the page. So that learning, once again, is not going on, okay? But these people are spreading the other knowledge as well too. Like I just said before, with regular peasantry, what you're learning at home, how to survive, how to live, how to raise animals, how to take care of the fields, stuff like that. You are learning that, okay? The other reason why this time period is called the Dark Ages is because there is a distinct absence of knowledge of the time period, okay? Coming from our perspective, a modern perspective. There is a distinct absence of knowledge of what people were doing at this time and, specifics. That's really tough. And why is that? Well, once again, because the vast majority of people were not sitting there at home writing about stuff that was going on. How did people learn? Well, they learned by word of mouth. Okay, when you learned how to do something, you didn't write about it in your memoirs, then give it to your son, who gave it to his grandson. You told somebody, right? The oral tradition. You told somebody how to do it. They learned how to do it. Same thing. Then they taught their child. So things weren't being written about. And when they were being written about, it was very, very few and far between, okay? And then you have to take those sources with a grain of salt. So let's say, I don't know anything about, I know that there was a guy that lived between, this certain time period, this certain time period, he was the Lord of whatever, okay? I might know his name, but I don't know anything about him. Well, let's say that I do some digging and I finally find an old manuscript from the year 825, right? Very rare. And it tells me all about this Lord, his name, who he was married to, and that he was the best guy ever. He was the best Lord ever. Well, there you go, right? I know it. Well, there's a problem with that. And what is the problem? The problem is that if that's the only source I have for that guy, Lord whatever, is it accurate? Is it true? Right? Because what happens if this guy who wrote this source about Lord whoever was employed by him? Do you think he's going to sit there and say how Lord whoever was a terrible guy, how he was cruel to his peasants, how he was, he never went to church? He's not going to say any of those things. He's going to say only nice things, only good things about this guy, because this guy is paying for his room and board. Well, what happens if I luck out and I find yet another source about Lord whoever? But this guy is saying how Lord whoever was cruel and he was a tyrant and he was mean. Which one do I now look at, right? Which one matters to me? Is it the one praising him or is it the one denigrating him? We have to hope that we find at least a third one, right? A third source that either backs up this one or backs up this one, because otherwise all we can do is take the little bits and pieces of knowledge that we do have and put them together and try and understand this time period to the best of our knowledge. And with a lot of times, a lot of these decades in this time period, and what they were doing, it's still very hazy. And so we just have to do the best we can. So in that way, these ages are kind of dark to us, but not dark because there's no learning going on, right? Not dark because they weren't doing anything. But the idea is that we just don't have that much knowledge about them, okay? And so we have to keep learning, keep digging, and finding more and more stuff, finding more and more information about these people and how they lived, okay? All right, moving on. Where are we? Get back to these folks. Here we go. Okay, so these people in the Middle Ages, I feel I've always had an affinity for them because I feel really bad for them, because they were almost like people that, you had the Romans forever, and all of a sudden these people are just kind of dropped into society, and they're expected to live, and they kind of had to carve out their own way. So remember, after the fall of the West, we have all of these barbarian kingdoms, right? All these areas where these barbarians have settled in what was formerly the empire, and over time, over generation after generation, they're slowly carving out their way of life, right? Their language, their customs, their culture, everything about them. They're learning about it, and they're figuring something out, okay? Oops, go back. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, go back to that, okay? All right. If we have to describe the Middle Ages for these people, because the vast, we always think about, like knights in shining armor and castles and lords and ladies and queens and kings and all that stuff. But the vast majority of these people were not kings and queens. They were not knights running around. They were just regular people. They were just regular people, and they were at the lowest. They were at the bottom of that pyramid of power, right? That hierarchy, and they were called peasants. They were peasants, and no matter if you were a Spanish peasant or if you were in France or you were in England, you were a peasant. A peasant was a peasant. The only thing different was that they were speaking different languages. But you would live in the same way, okay? Not one group had it better than the other one. And if we had to describe it in one word, we would describe it as brutal, okay? So the life of a peasant in the Middle Ages was a brutal time period, a brutal thing to deal with going through history, okay? Why was it so brutal? A whole lot of different reasons. Life expectancy. Life expectancy for these people was was not good. So everything was put on a very accelerated pace, you know, almost like how they say, like how like a fly or something has to do everything in its life, like in 2 weeks because it's going to be dead. Same thing with these people. Now they had no concept of time really, because it's not like they're sitting there watching the clock as it goes by. The only time, the sense of time they had was based on the seasons, right? So like, oh, it's springtime, it's wintertime, it's summertime, whatever it might be. These people did not know their own birth dates. You know, they're not looking at calendars and marking off the weekend, anything like that. It's just one day is the next, and one day is the next. Maybe you have a string of good days, and then you have a string of bad days, and hopefully the string of bad days doesn't lead to you never getting out of those string of bad days. But these people lived very brutal lives, very, very hard. It was very, very difficult. Lifespans, like I said, were extremely short. People got married at a very young age. It was customary. It was not considered gross or weird for a young girl to be given in marriage around the age of 13, 14, and have her first children at the age of 14, 15. Because that woman, if she made it to her 30s, her late 30s, she was doing pretty well. So that woman had to start having babies at a very young age, because if she made it past her first couple babies, it was expected that she's probably going to have numerous babies. Now, were they having a lot of babies because they thought it was fun? No, no, absolutely not. This was a practical thing. You had babies because those babies were the ones that were helping you. So they were hurting you and helping you, right? So more babies meant more resources needed for the babies, right? You got to feed the baby. You got to take care of it, everything else. But then if the baby survived and lasted, you also, the baby would now be, you know, the helper in the family, right? They would be helping. The girls would be helping with the younger children and doing things at home, cooking the meals, you know, darning the socks, things like that, fixing the clothes, making clothes, while the men would be out working on the land, growing the crops, tending the animals, and things like that. But you had a lot of children. There was no concept of birth control. There was no concept of you know, prenatal care, anything like that. For women, women especially, life was very difficult, and childbirth often was a death sentence. These people had no concept of germs, bacteriology, virology, any of that stuff. They had no idea about that. They only knew that, you know, that if you got sick, it was bad news, okay? They did not know what was going on inside their bodies. They had ideas, but they had no idea what was happening. They had no idea about blood vessels. They knew there was blood in you. They knew that there was, you know, other biological functions coming in and out of you, but they did not know how the things worked. And so life was very short, okay? If you lived to like the age of like 40 and 50, if you were a peasant, you were doing pretty well. We see nobles that are living to like their 50s, maybe 60s, but that's because their life is much, well, I want to say easier, but they have many more benefits than the poor, than the peasants. But once again, life for women was much shorter than men. I think I have a picture here. Yeah, there we go. So childbirth was the worst thing for a woman. It was a natural thing, obviously, but childbirth was very dangerous for a woman, and their life expectancy would go down by certain degrees for every child that they had, because it's not like you're getting rushed to the hospital. The ambulance wasn't coming to pick you up. There wasn't even really a doctor coming in to talk to you. There was no such thing as doctors. You might have a midwife, like an older woman who has been through it before or has delivered babies, but she's coming in there, and or it might just be another guy rolling in there. And, you know, he's not scrubbing up before he helps deliver that baby. He's just, you know, he probably just got done, you know, slopping the pigs, and now he's in there reaching in and pulling out that baby. And obviously we know where that leads, led to infection. If the birth was a very difficult birth, and the mother lost a lot of blood, that was basically it, right? There was absolutely no concept of transfusions or anything like that. If she survived, she survived. So we see that men at this time often have 2 or 3 wives, not at the same time, but they are married, and their lifespans to maybe between 2 and 3 women, because you know, you get married young, that wife dies. You know, it is not uncommon for men and the records to have more than one wife. My little timer just went off, so let me double check what's going on. It looks like we're doing okay. Let me restart this and move on really quick. Okay. So moving on. Where are we? Men fared a little bit better, but not much. When we've done excavations of graves at this time, we see that the bone structure, that these people were not just these towering, monsters. They were very short because of nutritional deficiencies. But the men oftentimes have signs of violence on them, like where a bone broke and didn't heal correctly. So that person probably walked with a painful limp their whole life, or for however long that they had that fracture. We see cuts and things on places on the bones where they were fighting and they got stabbed, and that was probably like the killing wound. We see signs of parasite infection, okay, because these people were eating unclean foods a lot of times, and then that had an effect on their bodies as well. And so these, like I said, lifespans for men was a little bit longer, but not too much, because anything could become a death sentence, right? We take so many of our medical issues for granted. If I get a toothache, if I have an impacted tooth or something like that, it's starting to get infected. Well, I know I have to go get it pulled out. So I go to the dentist, or I go to the oral surgeon, and they put me to sleep, or they give me an anesthesia or whatever it might be, and they get in there and they extract it and they give me the antibiotics to clear it up. But that was non-existent back then. So I would basically go, if I had an impacted tooth, to my buddy. He would dig around in there with a knife, and he would finally pry out the tooth. The only anesthesia was me basically getting drunker than a skunk, because there was no locals or anything like that. And then they would just shove like a dirty cloth in there to soak up the blood. And who knows, if I'm lucky, it just heals and that's it. I go on my way. If I'm unlucky, then infection sets in, it spreads into my blood system, and within a week I have a fever and I'm confined to bed, and a week later I'm dead. And I was healthy just 2 weeks ago. Now all of a sudden I'm gone, because that's how quick things could happen. A kid crawling in a tree, falls, breaks his foot, and that could be once again a death sentence, because their idea of medical technology, and it's just not there. Okay, even this old stuff that the Romans had. The Romans were very advanced for their time period. When it came to medical, surgeries, and bone setting, any stuff like that, that's all what? It's all gone, right? It's all gone now. Not that it's been thrown into the ocean or something, it's just, it's not available. These people don't have any access to it, and even if they did, they wouldn't know what the heck these Romans are talking about, okay? So it's just not there. So these people, it's like they have to basically relearn how to live. And it's going to take generation after generation and hundreds of millions of deaths for these people to figure out, what works and what doesn't work. Okay. Children were the easiest to die, obviously, because they just were, not in a good way. Oops, let me get my water. And so children came and children went, and it's very sad when you see these graves that are dug up with children in there as well. All right. Besides it being like that, remember, there's no real law structure in the early Middle Ages. There's no real law structure. So before we had, the Romans, whatever, you couldn't just do what you wanted if you lived in a Roman province, especially if you're in a city. You couldn't just go set somebody's house on fire or go steal their stuff, because there was, there's troops around. There's law and order. There's a governor. There's a, proconsul. There's, there's rules. There's law books. Well, in the early Middle Ages, that really doesn't exist. So not only are you struggling to try and make ends meet and try and get food and not die from just a simple infection, but you are also under the, whims of a violent population. A local lord might roll in there, and that lord might, take what he wants from you, and there's nothing you can do about it, because you can challenge him. Well, it's him and 30 other guys on horseback with armor. You're not going to last very long. If they want to rampage through your village, they're going to rampage through your village. If you don't pay them like a extortion fee, they're going to take whatever they want. They're probably going to do that anyway. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't go complain to the king because you don't even have a king, or the king is hundreds of miles away. You can't go complain to the local sheriff. There is nothing like that at all. You just have to go life, go through your life hoping that these bad things aren't happening. Okay. In the early Middle Ages, there is no, so unlike with the Romans, we have no central authority. Okay. We have no central authority. People live in local communities and are controlled by local lords, okay, or warlords. So there's no central authority in the early Middle Ages. Yeah, we're going to talk about the rise of that. There's no central authority. People live in local communities and are controlled by their local lords or warlords. So some guy, has a horse and he's got armor and weapons, and he gets other 20 guys around him. He's in charge. You have to do as he asks. If he wants your stuff, he's going to take your stuff, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay. When it comes to how these people were eating, like I said, they did not have much. Back to that. Oops, where'd it go? Go back. Go. Okay. So one of the key foodstuffs for a peasant is this thing called pottage, P-O-T-T-A-G-E, pottage. And pottage is a type of soup. It's a thick soup. It's not a good soup, but it is at least it's better than nothing. Let me show you a picture of it here. There it is. Okay, so if we look at the picture here, we see this person is probably either drinking a bowl full of cream or milk, but they're probably eating their pottage. Okay. And pottage is a soup that's made from like peas and roots that have been ground up and smashed, okay, turned into kind of like a paste. And then they add bread to it as well, and then they might put some like milk into it, okay? It's kind of like a thick, like a gruel, like a porridge, okay? But if you're a peasant, this is what you're eating. You're not running down to the steakhouse and eating out every night. Every single day is a fight against starvation. Every single day is a fight against starvation, and every single one of these people is losing the battle against malnutrition. Okay, they're getting some food, but it's not they're not getting the nutrients and vitamins and everything else that they need to have healthy lives. That's why these people are not living, 1,000 years. When you see their skeletons, you see that most of these people are not. Double check something. You see that these people are not. 6'5", monsters, 210 pounds. They're not. They're little people. They're, many of them barely over 5 feet, and they just they're not getting the nutrients and everything that they need. You could forage if you're a peasant. You go out there and forage in the forest, grabbing mushrooms or roots or berries, whatever it might be. If you live by a stream or the ocean, you can fish a little bit. You can get sort of like clams or whatever might be on the rocks. But if you live in the hinterland, if you live in the middle of some place there, not by the ocean, you grow your food mainly. Okay, you're growing vegetables. Now, if something happens, if there's a blight or if there's a drought or if there's a flood and those vegetables go, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. There's no place to go get extras, anything like that. You have to rely on the sympathy of like your fellow peasants, maybe, or of the church. But you're in a hard way if that happens. What about meat? For the most part, meat was a rarity for these people. They just were not eating meat. Maybe a fish here or there, but they were not eating meat. Only on special occasions like Christmas time or harvest time, They might, pigs were a big thing. They weren't eating pigs, except at like Christmas time or harvest time, they might eat like a piglet. But pigs were easy to keep because in the morning you could just open up the pen and then the pigs would go out and forage for themselves out in the forest eating. Then at the end of the day, the pigs would come back and you'd have them back in. But if you had like chickens or a sheep or a cow, if you're lucky enough for that, were you eating them? There it is. So if you were lucky enough to have a cow, were you carving up old Bessie and eating a steak sandwich? No, you were not. Absolutely not. You were keeping Bessie alive as long as you could because you were using her milk for milk, just to drink milk, and you were using it to craft, cream and butter. But you were keeping her alive for her secondary products. You weren't just eating her. Same thing with chickens. You're not eating the chicken dinner. You're using the chickens for eggs and so on, or sheep milk, and then you're using the sheep's wool for clothing, stuff like that. And that's why these people, I'm going to show you this next time, these people were living right in this one little house. Guess where all their animals are? In the house with them while they're living in there too. You're living with the animals and all the bugs and everything else that the animals bring in and everything else that comes out of the animals. Because you don't want them outside, because outside during the nighttime, well, predators can get to them, like wolves or foxes. But then the biggest thing is people. People can get to them too. And so, might run off with them. And there's nobody you can complain to once again. So you have to do what you can, okay? But aspects of life, everywhere these peasants look, everywhere the people look, it doesn't matter where you are in Europe, you see signs of the former life, of the past, of Rome, okay? You don't know anything about the Romans, because, it's not like you went to school learning about them. You haven't read books about them, but there's signs of their existence are everywhere. So you see an aqueduct that you might still be getting water from. It's built up there. Now, if it collapses, you're not rebuilding it. If here's an old bridge that you might be crossing over, and this bridge has been there since the time of your great-great-great-grandfather, if it collapses, you're not rebuilding it because you don't have the technology, you don't have the idea to rebuild it like the Romans did. The Romans are ghosts to these people. They're all around you, examples of them, that there was these ancient people that used to be here and they knew everything, but now they're gone. And slowly these Roman things, these Roman, the statues, whatever, starts to fall into decay, and weeds creep in, okay, and they're just there, and that they used to be there, but you don't really know. They almost become mythical, almost like they were gods in their own right, okay? But there is a God in your life now, and that God is the Christian God, right? Because that is the person who is part of your life completely now, okay? Okay, looks like we're still good. We're gonna wrap this second part up here in just a minute. But anyway, in the Middle Ages, especially the early Middle Ages, I already had it up there, especially the early Middle Ages, the church is everywhere in your life, okay? It's gone a long way from being hunted and persecuted in the Roman times up to now all of a sudden we're talking like the year 600, 700, 800, 500 years later. The Christian church in Rome, the Catholic Church, is in everybody's life, whether you like it or not. It is there, okay? From cradle to grave, Christianity is part of your life. You don't get a choice whether you want to be a part of it or not. You are a part of it. You're literally born into it. As soon as you come out and you take your first cries as a baby, there's a priest there, and he is blessing you, and then you make a time, your parents make a time to go to the little church, and you get baptized. So immediately, without you even knowing anything, even your own name yet, you're getting baptized and put in the church. You're expected to go to church on Sundays. That's the only time that people aren't working because they're going to church on Sundays. You're expected to be there. It's not a choice. You are expected to be in church, and you live in a small enough community that if you don't go to church, people notice that you're not going to church. And sure enough, that priest will be there asking, "Hey, what's going on? Why are you not at church? What's happening?" And if you give any inclination about any type of heretical thought, this idea that maybe I don't believe this certain way, that's stopped very quickly, and we'll talk more about that later. But these people's lives is from the beginning to the end is is superstition. It is buying into the church. It's the same thing that brought the people into the church in the first place. And that was the idea that no matter what happens in this life, all the pain and misery going through, as long as you stay being a good person, as long as you stay being a faithful Christian, that in the end, it won't matter. You were going to go to heaven and you're going to be in this place, paradise, right? You're going to be in a place where there's no pain, there's no misery, there's no stealing, there's no, starving, anything like that. But you have to be a good person, and you have to do what the church tells you what to do, because that's the church is God's gift on earth. It is God's representation on earth. So you have to do what these priests say, you have to do what the bishops say, and everything else, and you especially have to do what the Pope says in Rome. And if you don't, if you lead a life of sin, if you lead a life of being bad, hell is a very realistic thing for these people. They truly believe that there were places around the world that you could, like open mouths, that you could walk into hell, and that demons would come forth and everything else. And so if you did bad things, you're gonna get taken to hell, and then you're gonna spend the rest of your life in damnation. These people. That was a major part of their lives. It's hard for us as a secular society, for the most part, to understand just how deep this went into these people's lives, just how important this was to their lives, but it really was. And the church made sure that you understood that, and they wanted to know. So if you did something, you were expected to go to confession. You were expected to go to the priest, explain to him, confess to him what you had done, right? Maybe you had some dirty thoughts about your sister-in-law, or you stole a loaf of bread from your neighbor, or you did something bad. You were expected to go tell the priest and confess, so that, because the priest was the only person who could absolve you of that sin. Okay, because if you took that sin with you, then God would know, and God, to God, you were not penitent. You were okay with being a bad guy. And so the only way to lose that sin was through the church. So that meant that the church had extreme power. Not only did they control you from beginning to the end, they knew everything about everybody that was going on in these villages, right? Because you were telling them all of your secrets. They knew everything, and they used this to a large degree when it came to gaining more and more power throughout these places that are going to start coming up after the Romans with these barbarians. Okay. But yeah, so once again, the lives of the peasants was, well, it just wasn't that great. Okay. All right, moving on really quickly. Okay, what is going on here? Everything that when you got sick could be ascribed to the old ways of thinking about stuff, which was astrology. So oftentimes if you went to like a healer in the town, he had no more knowledge than you, but he had a way of describing it so that it seemed like he knew what he was talking about. So if like you came, you're like, oh, I'm complaining about headaches, the local healer would do different tests with you. One of the tests here is called uroscopy. What's going on here? Well, the healer, the doctor, would have you urinate into a jar, and then he would study it. He would study the color, right? He would look at it. Was it like pale white? Was it thick? Was it yellow? Did it have anything else in it? Blood? How did it smell? Like he'd smell it, and he would, make a little mark. Oftentimes he would taste it. Did it did it taste like urine? Did it have more ammonia in it? Did it have other particulates in it? Did it taste like there was blood in it? Whatever it might be. And then they would give you a prescription for whatever they thought, would fix it, your problems. Like, now, the church did not buy into this for the most part. The church said that, this type of knowledge was heretical, that this was not what the church was trying to teach. And so they would try and push away from this, and the church would explain to you that the only thing that you really needed was faith in God, right? Was prayer. That if somebody was hurt or sick, that through prayer and through faith, that person would you know, get out of it. And if they didn't get out of it, it meant that they were time and they were meant to move on anyway to heaven. Okay, so you see that, and you also see the start of what's called bloodletting. And what's really amazing is that this concept, this thing, kept going for hundreds of years. People were still doing this in the 19th century, if you can believe it. People were still doing this in the all the way up until the mid 1800s. The idea came from the Greeks that if you were getting headaches all the time or you had stomach pains, that your insides, of the fluids in your insides, like blood was one of them, were out of whack. That everybody had to have an equal level of certain stuff. So they believed that if they took some blood from you, like actually drained blood out of you, it would kind of make your equilibrium a little bit better. So they would do that. They would make a little incision in your arm, usually, maybe in your hand, but usually in your arm, or in your leg, right, inside of your leg, and they would drain you. They would drain like a cup. Now we know that's usually not the best course of action, that if somebody's already sick, the last thing they need is to have blood taken out of their body. But this was a tradition that kept going on for a very, very, very long time, okay? And this was basically as advanced as medical science got for the most part, okay? All right. Okay, folks. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to talk really briefly about the Eastern Romans, and then we're going to talk about them one last time later on in about a week or two, and then we'll be done talking about them. We recognize this map from the last time that we talked, and remember, the empire gets split apart, right? And the West falls, but then the East stays on, okay? The East stays on, and so these people, they never call themselves this, but remember, we know them as the Byzantines, okay? So the Byzantines, so that's the Eastern Roman Empire, right? And they are headquartered in the city of Constantine, and that is Constantinople, city of Constantine, right? And Constantinople is right here. Constantinople, like I just got done telling you, the vast majority of people lived in the rural areas. There's urban areas just don't exist, okay? They just don't exist in the Middle Ages. Large like cities like Paris and things, they're nothing. They're little fly specks. London, little tiny fly speck. There's the large cities of Rome size just don't exist anymore. Most people live in small villages. They live out with their family and extended families in small areas where there might be like 30 families in one village, and that's about it. Okay, but Constantinople is the difference on that one. Constantinople is a major city. Got a picture. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is called the Golden Horn. It is this large promontory that sticks out into the sea that connects Europe and Asia. And so this is where Constantine built his city. He's got two big giant, these were his walls, then a new set of walls were built here. These walls were humongous, okay, to protect against any attackers. The whole on the northeast and south side of the city was the ocean that had huge walls around here too. So this city was pretty much impregnable. Nobody could attack it. They tried to attack it, but for the most part, it stayed firm for a long time. I've got a picture of it here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. So here's an artist representation of it. Constantinople, like I said, was not the norm. Okay, most people in the Middle Ages were not living like this, but this was the largest city, one of the largest cities on the planet. Okay. Trade was coming in, and that's how they made their money. Trade from Asia to the east, or excuse me, from the east to the west, and it was making them, they were the connection, right? These were what was left of the Roman Empire. These were the connection between Europe in the west and Asia and Africa in the east, okay? And so they were doing very well for themselves. The only explain what I'm writing down. Okay, so the only emperor that I want you to know about in Constantinople for the Byzantines is Justinian. Okay, Justinian, show him a picture, mosaic of him. Where is he? There he is. So there's Justinian on the left, and then there's his empress Theodora on the right. Okay, so there he is. Justinian, we mentioned this briefly the last time we had a lecture, but this is about 150 years after Constantine. He tried to go back and retake the West, okay, reclaim the West, but it was done. He took a lot of the stuff over again, but eventually it all fell apart because he just ran out of money. He just ran out of troops and everything else, and the barbarians were too strong. So the East, as they start losing this again, the East just goes back to this. Now, Justinian was a very powerful emperor, and he wanted his rule to be focused on law and order, okay? But remember, we now have, because we saw this one with Constantine, not the separation, but the melding of what? The church and the state, right? So we have now a connection between the emperor and the Holy Church, okay? And we see that with Justinian. So he's got his men here on the right, his counselors. You can see their army, right? So you recognize that little sign on their shields, right? The Chi-Rho, symbol of Jesus. And then on his left, we see his other counselors, his what? As you can see right here, a little cross. These are his religious authority, right? The priests and everything else that have come to him, and they're talking to him about religious issues, okay? So what he does is after he does his reconquest, that falls apart, but he gets together all of the law codes that he can. That's what's left, what Constantine did, what the previous emperors did. He puts them all together in what's called the Codus Juris, or the Justinian Code, okay? This is a set of law books, okay? And this takes all of the Roman traditions and puts them all into this giant volume set of law books and codes, okay? So this is all happening during the Middle Ages. While the West is shrouded in darkness and kind of has fallen apart, right? In years 500, 600, 700, the East is still holding on to that idea of knowledge and the passing that torch of knowledge, okay? So there's certainly no such thing as dark ages or anything floating around over there, okay? This was on your test last time that we didn't get to. That's the answer I gave you. Over time, since they are situated in the East, the Byzantines are becoming more Greek than they are Roman, right? Greek becomes the language of court, of law. With all the emperors speak Greek. They get to the point where the emperors don't even speak Latin anymore. They don't know how to speak Latin. They speak, everything is done in the Greek style, okay? Everything's done in Greek. Now, why is this important? This is important because when we jump ahead about 300-400 years, we're going to see that since now their culture is shifting from the Latin to Greek, there's going to start being a sense of distrust between East and West. They're both Christian, but we're going to start seeing a sense of distrust between the Greek East and the Latin West, okay? Even though they both believe in the same God, we're going to see that geography and culture is going to slowly split them apart. That the only thing they have in common is religion, but how, as we see with most religions, how you view religion is going to be a source of contention between two groups, two parties, okay? And that is, well, it's going to spell bad news for the Christians in the Middle Ages, especially when another group comes up, okay? He begins work on, this is an ancient chain that was actually put between the two parts of the Golden Horn here to prevent ships coming and going if they didn't want it. If they didn't want those ships to be coming and going. Okay, and they could retract the chain if you were given permission, but it was also like when they were invaded, this is the real chain, they just have it tossed into a big pile over there now. Okay, and then we have this. Justinian wanted to, consecrate and build the biggest church in the world dedicated to Christ. And so it took about 20 years, but he, right there in the heart of Constantinople, he built what's called the Hagia Sophia. And the Hagia Sophia in Greek means holy wisdom. Okay, holy wisdom. So this is the church here. These minarets were put in later on after the Muslim conquest, okay? But it's a beautiful, beautiful church. And then I've also posted another link for you guys to take a look at, okay? And there as well about the construction of the church and the inside of it and everything else. Here's an example of the copy. Here's a copy of the Justinian Code. It's many books. It's called the Codex. And there you go, okay? But why are we talking about these guys for right now? We're talking about these guys right now because, like I said, we see a mistrust begin between right, the Latin West and the Greek East. So remember, we talked about this in the last class before. Remember, Constantine, in the Council of Nicaea, he got all of the church officials together and he said, okay, come up with what's going on in this religion. And they did, to a certain degree. And they came up, remember, the 5 patriarchs, right? Okay, the 5 patriarchs. Or the 5 leaders of the Christian church, right? And so remember, there was one in Alexandria, there was one in Antioch, there was one in where's the third one? Oh, one in Jerusalem, right? The holy city. But then the 2 big ones, you think the Jerusalem one was a big one, but the 2 big ones, the one was in Constantinople, and then the other one was where? In the Eternal City in Rome. And the other ones start to fall away, and those 2 are the last ones left. So now that since you have this mistrust, you have eventually a split in the churches. Okay? And this happens in the year 1054, and it's called the Great Schism. And that's what you're seeing up here. A schism is a separation. It's a having in something, having something, okay? Having it, Having. You're cutting it in half, okay? So this happens in the year 1054. We see this distrust that goes on for centuries finally splits apart the very churches, the very Christian church that Constantine put into place, right? That he gave allowance to worship freely. And so we see a split between the Roman Catholic Church and in the East, the Greek Orthodox Church. And what happens, what's really crazy about this still is how it is now. There's not the animosity and hatred like they had back then, but there still is a Greek Orthodox Church, and there still is a Roman Catholic Church, and they go basically geographical. So we're going to see everything in the West is going to focus on the Roman Catholic Church, and everything in the East is going to focus on the Greek Orthodox Church. Okay, so everything in the West is going to be focused from Rome, and everything in the East is going to be focused from Constantinople. Okay? Okay, folks. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll finish up. Okay?